Appreciate the invite, Sandy. My name's Conrad Ock. I'm on the sales and success teams here at Elements.Cloud, joined by one of our product managers, Ollie Jeffcoat out of the UK. We are presenting one side of our product today, and we're going to kick it off with some background, some evidence, some metrics, some data. So at Elements, we like to say we help teams understand their environments to a greater degree and de-risk making changes to it, ultimately accelerating time to value, whether that's projects, whether that's backlog, day-to-day operations, you name it. It's all about metadata. And when we first engage with Salesforce customers, they tell us these three things or a combination of them. Org is super complex, got a bunch of technical debt over the years built up, and we lack relevant documentation. Now, I don't need to go into the nuts and bolts of why technical debt's slowing us down and the amount of budgets and IT resources it takes to manage ongoing. Instead, what I'd like to do is flip that into some data that we've essentially unearthed. We had 138 production orgs that agreed to take part in this study. And what you're seeing in front of you are the number of fields created, and over the course of a year, since their inception, they have not even test data in them. Okay, so 40% plus of these fields are not being used. And if you take a look at the other data we have for custom objects themselves, that's over 50%. So you got to realize the business is making enhancement requests. The Salesforce IT team, the engineering team, they're delivering on these requests. And then a very large portion of the time, what they build goes unused. I think the big question here is why. If anybody wants to chime in, feel free, go right ahead. If you have any questions, by all means, you can use the chat or just start talking. Interrupt me, please.
Users aren't really managing the change. It's usually a manager or a senior developer.
So would you call that adoption? What would you call the root cause of this?
Well, core business requirements, gathering, engaging with the customer.
Quality assurance too, like going in afterwards and it's what we built, really what's needed.
Mm-hmm. Certainly adoption is part of it.
QA after the fact instead of in front of the fact.
Yeah, post QA.
So I appreciate it's only 138 unique production orgs that we've been able to agree to take part in this, but from what we've seen, this is prolific throughout the ecosystem. If we take a look at sort of well, this is one understanding that I've come across to explain the why, and this is actually ripped off from a Focus on Force course by Nicole McGuire. You can see her name on the top right up there. She runs this, it's called Contained Agile Methodology Process. And this really spoke to me, primarily because she articulates the change cycle in a circle and then overlays it in a matrix. And we can see, and her point here is that teams are essentially jumping from discovery to build. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. One of the big ones is teams are measured by the speed or frequency at which they deliver their sprints, the amount they can deliver in each sprint. So it's a constant rush to get stuff out the door. And the metrics that we're studying are what happens after that. So on this matrix, she's articulating both difficulty being very high and effort being very high post-discovery, pre-build. And if this is the most difficult, highest effort stuff, frankly, I wouldn't be doing it either, right? If I didn't have to. So if you can skirt this area of the cycle, it's no longer on your plate. You've passed it off to a different team to go and do the construction. anyway, check out Focus on Force for this contained agile methodology. I think it's pretty interesting. She articulates a bunch of different agile methodologies and where this fits in and how it accounts for different scenarios you come across. But this is one of the big ones. And her big point here, go figure, is that documentation helps with a lot of this, and slowing things down at the beginning helps accelerate them later on and reduce rework. One of the quotes she had in here, I think, is something the majority of the ecosystem in terms of Salesforce teams can relate to. It's like, if we created these environments and we created these problems in the environments, we're not going to solve them by thinking with the same mindset. We have to make a mental model shift. We have to understand how we cause problems for ourselves in the future. So let's think about this for a second. Our current requirements gathering process is generating 40% or 50% unused fields and objects over the course of, let's say, a year, the first year. What if this applied to everything we touched, everything we created? If you could drop one of every 3 or 2 enhancement requests, what would your backlog look like? And if the business understood, let's say a CIO or a platform owner, if they understood that 33% of activities were a complete wash, what would they be doing differently? How would they be thinking differently about making changes in terms of your, let's call it Salesforce org management structure? So diving into the root cause, we talked a little bit about adoption, poor requirements gathering, looking at QA. The question is, if we identify the root cause, can it be addressed? Now, what Elements is helping our customers with is transitioning from what you're seeing here, requirements gathering, with a more of a focus on the actual requirements being submitted. Now, this is on the business side. This is focusing on helping the business articulate their problem, not their solution. The business is good at articulating solutions, and IT teams are good at picking up a ticket and just delivering that order. But is it the right stuff? Is it what's going to get that problem solved? We have to account for more comprehensive business analysis. And what we've noticed is that contextualizing user stories specifically against the business's operations, their business process, is what is yielding these better outcomes. Teams understand the true requirements. And this is not just BAs, product managers, admins. It's actually the developers who then pick up that ticket. And when they pick it up, they understand how it's going to be used. They understand what they have to build towards in terms of acceptance criteria, knowing it can actually be adopted. And this is where we're headed with what we're going to show you today. Any questions so far?
That's a good summary.
So there's, if we picture, let's dumb this down into a basic Salesforce change cycle. In the green, we've got Salesforce teams using Salesforce, essentially adopting it. We've got enhancement requests coming in. We've got large scale projects as well. This is all about business requirements gathering, and then breaking it down into more manageable work items, understanding the impact of those changes, and then handing it to the team that's going to go build it. What we saw with that camp screenshot is teams going from requirements gathering, just skipping and jumping straight to build. Elements as a product focuses on these boxes in purple, these activities. So when we look to measure effectiveness of this cycle, we're not just thinking about deployment frequency. That's really only one component. It's DevOps down here. We're thinking about lead time. We're thinking about reducing lead time. We're also thinking about getting more articulate information in that requirements generation and requirements gathering phase, so that every person along the way, whether it's BAs over here, product managers, building out work items, and other teams, whether it's developers overlapping here, doing impact assessment, we're trying to get the information that help teams understand what the right thing to build is, consolidated, documented, and in context to that ticket, that work item, so that the team picking it up to build has that same body of knowledge to work with without having to go to 2, 3, 4 different places, or just not going anywhere and saying, okay, I'm going to code this. So we're looking at lead time. I think one of the big successes we've had was with one of our customers, one of our recent customers, who spent 4 months um, putting together a requirements gathering document, all text. Okay. And we're able to dumb that down into about a week's worth of effort, taking text requirements, building out a business process map, and then generating user stories against it. What we're going to look at today is specifically around business operations. So we're going to hit on 3 points. We're going to start by looking at converting an existing process map to a different methodology called UPN. This is Universal Process Notation. So first off, why would you do such a thing? Well, we'll explain that to you and why it needs to be done to be able to generate user stories off a map. In addition, we're going to take a look at generating process maps from text requirements. So let's say if you don't have a process map, but you have text articulating what processes are being performed by the business, you can start off from that step as well. And then once you have that, step 3, you can generate your user stories from that business operation so that you're always taking into context what the business is going to do with what you build. And obviously, this is not vaporware. This stuff's available today. So first point here, universal process notation. It's a process map, but you have one symbol to memorize, and you're looking at it right here. It's a box. There's an input and an output. There could be multiple inputs, multiple outputs. But what you should be reading here is this reads as a user story. There are essentially 4 criteria: as a, when, I want to, so that I can. And by converting classic business process maps into this universal process notation, you're doing a lot of the heavy lifting, getting to that user story created. It's a visual. It's easier for the business to articulate and understand. It's also, from what we've seen, it's far easier to get business stakeholders engaged than having them read through spreadsheets or Word docs. One of the other big successes we've had is being able to translate what would otherwise have taken 3 weeks to get functional sign-off from the business down to 3 days. So step 1, we're just going to follow this, converting existing maps to UPN. So here's a map. Medical services, talking about patients, waiting for doctors, trying to get nurses available, ultimately scheduling an appointment, getting medication. These images we're populating inside of a GPT prompt, such as ChatGPT or Gemini. And as you can see here, it's a bunch of text, but what we're doing is we're giving it some basic explanation in terms of what we want to see. Something as simple as explain what you see here. And then it'll come back to you with text. When it comes back as text, we then ask it, okay, rewrite that in the form of a user story. As a, when, I want to, so that I can. And by doing that, we then have the framework of text to feed into our application that will write the process map for us. And this is the point we're trying to get to. I don't know how big that is on your screen, but I'll zoom into this.
Good.
Right? This is where we're trying to get to. As you can see, pretty quick. We've seen our customers using this when engaging with the business.
Just to pause for a second, although I'm having some technical issues. Okay, we're good
Sure.
now. Thank you. All right.
Yeah. Did you see the text getting built in ChatGPT here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So pretty straightforward. What I like to do once it comes back with the text is explain those 4 criteria that we want. Now I'm saying write the steps in the form of activities as follows with 4 criteria. There's a role, an input trigger, the actual activity, and then the past tense of the activity. That's the easiest way to get some semblance of an output here. And so by giving it that, we then get the text, these steps rewritten in the form of a user story that will then convert to a map using our app. This portion is not yet baked into the product, but the prompts work so well, you might as well copy and paste. It's far faster. Jump over here, say we're going to create a new map. We turn on the GPT functionality, you get instructions. There's some prompt guidance here, talking about articulating what the process is, what are the start and end points, what resources involved, anything else that's important in that map. And it will leverage the prompt to go out and do what we're doing here. We've just noticed that it's easier, more effective to give it this two-stage prompt guidance in the chat itself, and then take the final text and copy it into our map generator. This is just finishing up here. And there we go, 14 points we've got. So we can then copy it, paste it into the instructions, paste it in the description as well. So we have a history of that documentation, what was input here. Then we can give it a name. And then we create it. This usually takes between a minute or two, depending on the steps and the complexity, but it's pretty consistent. Any questions thus far?
Doing great.
Well, I can share with you the overwhelming majority of first movers in this technology are in the consulting space. I know how much fun it is to write user stories, but we are taking a major lift off consultants' backs in terms of the requirements gathering to get, I would say, an understandable and collaborative canvas put together where the business can understand that, yes, this is what we want built, aligned with our process, and then the team to go then and build it has a firm grasp of what needs to be built against it. If anybody was at TDX most recently in San Francisco, our VP of product stood up and did a presentation on 73 times faster analysis, and the entire portion of the change cycle that we handle, as you saw, from requirements gathering to handing off a story to a development team. That's what that figure is meant to articulate. It is literally that much faster in terms of time. Once you factor in how long it takes the business to articulate what they need, going back and forth, getting sign off, then planning out those work items. The work items themselves, with one of our customers, we did, I think it was slalom. Yeah, it was slalom. We did a human versus machine comparison with the same map, and it was 70% faster to generate the stories from the process map. And both of those senior consultants agreed that the acceptance criteria were of that much higher quality. And we're going to see that as well. We'll be able to spin up stories against this map. And it's creating now. So first it places the activities, then it assigns resources and draws in the links in between them. So what I like to say is this is essentially a 70% solution as is. You still have to sit down with the business and groom this to understand exactly what's going on in the organization. And that's really what functional sign-off's all about. So what I'm doing here is just organizing the visuals so it makes a little more sense. As you see, some of the lines get overlapped. You also have to come back and realize, oh, okay, you don't just wait for a doctor and the process ends. Once that doctor is available, the process continues. So this is part of the grooming. Also, you notice there are no systems involved here. As part of the prompt, there were no systems input. We didn't say this is happening in Salesforce or NetSuite or what have you. I don't know if this is large enough for you guys to read the text.
It's good.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, again, point here is just we're going through this grooming, and it's usually with a business stakeholder, somebody who knows what's going on operationally. From here, once you do get functional sign-off, you can select the boxes which are written as stories, and then you can produce those those user stories against them, and it's gonna also fill in acceptance criteria. So here we can show you one as an example. So it's created the story. Just edit it to pull it up. So as a patient, when the nurse is unavailable, I want to wait in the waiting room. I don't know if I want to wait, but I do have to wait so that I can be attended to when the nurse is available. It's also plugged into acceptance criteria here, needing to be able to wait in the waiting room and needing to be attended when the nurse is available. So it's not complete by any means, but it does give you that framework to build and document against. We do have a native integration with Jira. So you can connect different Jira projects to Elements. And with that bidirectional sync, it will ingest existing stories if you want to keep track of them. And it will also produce those stories inside of Jira. So that, in a nutshell, is the functionality that we've deployed, leveraging AI to really help the business in articulating what we see as the root cause of the problem of a lot of the technical debt in terms of what we've articulated today, fields and objects being created that never get touched over the course of the first year of inception.
Leonard, I have a question for you. I have a few clients who are using or hooked up with Elements.
Mhm.
And I know that in these process maps, you can link different parts of the process map to the metadata of their instance.
Yep.
Let's say I had a process map like this, it's hooked up to different parts of the metadata. If I was to use the ask elements, how does that interact with a synced org? Like, will it recommend, oh, you need to consider this object or that field?
Yeah, so this is in alpha right now. I think it's going to see a drastic, and actually that might be a good question for Ollie. Ollie, is ask elements going to be changed drastically over the next, foreseeable future, let's say?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. We definitely have plans to revisit that one this year. Because we think there's a lot we can do to improve it, particularly having a better understanding of existing metadata, and giving better recommendations in line with well-architected guidance. So yeah, absolutely. The plan is to kind of revisit that one this year.
Yeah, but to Sandy's point here, the Ask Elements piece is designed to go and read from the metadata dictionary in the org you have connected here, identify existing and potential new metadata that would have to be created to support that request, that user story. If you guys haven't seen that, that looks like this. It's essentially a metadata dictionary that gets updated every day, and it indexes and inventories what's in there. So you can go and manually connect, like copy and paste a flow. Copy it, go paste it on the activity. Let's say there's an automation checking nurse availability, etc. Then you can paste that metadata item. So you can see as part of this process, we have this flow inside the Salesforce org, actually inside these 4 orgs, that's been built to support that activity. What we're trying to do there conceptually is break the silo between business operation and Salesforce configuration.
Yeah, that's in my use of Elements, that's the part that I found really handy, is hooking up the metadata. So if I work with a client, I build something out, and I know what objects it's pointing to, and then we put the project aside, and then it needs to be readdressed like 6, 7 months later. I can go back and I can see exactly what we've done and how it's connected. But I'm just wondering how AI can, or I'm watching how AI could improve.
But just question on these elements, people, and Sandy, you have experience. I found in practice, this is very, very hard to put in place because it's kind of finding new lifestyle for admins, developers, and everybody who has metadata interaction with. How is user adoption to this to be up to date? This is my question. What do you see on the market? Is reality of adopting your solution, having it up to date after 6 months, 2 years, things like that?
Well, it really comes down to executive alignment, because if teams are staring this in the face and they want to do something about it, we give them 2 options. You want to do field cleanup on a handful of objects just so you can stuff that next managed package in, or build out that next app. Sure, we'll help you. We'll help you put out the fire. But some teams want and have determined that they're willing to change how they operate. They're willing to change their standard practices to account for not wasting, 30, 40, 50% of their productivity in a given year producing things that are never going to get built because they just aren't aligned with how the company operates. So to answer your question, it does depend, but in terms of adoption, it's not always the admins that are doing this. In fact, I'd argue it's more the product managers, the BAs that are understanding, looking at the dictionary, understanding that, okay, as part of this activity, we have an existing flow supporting this. So now it's in context. So when that story gets handed off, they go and examine the existing flow supporting the activity before going and spinning up something new. And 6 months down the road, yeah, they're still doing it because they don't enjoy building user stories as much. They like going into, as an example, they like going into Salesforce setup and seeing the things that were built supporting the business right where they operate. Whether it's knowledge linked here or whether it's the actual business processes, so you can see what it's impacting.
Just for context, there's a Chrome extension we've got on there that's linked up.
Yeah, the Chrome extension will overlay.
And in these days of AI and executives like what it does, my personal opinion is that they're looking at it, this will help them reduce resources and have everything working fine without people. In my mind, I am seeing that we need more resources to run all of this and have it in good, healthy state than what is right now in place on the market. Even doesn't have to be admins, must be somebody else, BA, who needs to get different duties on his job in order to support all of this initiative and things like that. When I say this loud, do you agree with me, or I'm just bullshitting around?
No. I don't think it's bullshit. In fact, I think you're nailing it exactly. And it's more in terms of a shuffle regarding the allocation of those individuals' times. Are they spending less time trying to figure out what's going to break and more time making sure that they're building the right things? Because classically, the majority of the time is spent trying to figure out how to deliver on what the business has determined to be the solution, which from what we're seeing in terms of these figures, right, not always accurate.
To be honest, I'm putting this as on the weight of the everything what has director or more or higher in his title as ownership or all of this, because doers just don't have enough power to push this through the system. And when you sell your product to somebody who wants to engage and use this, do you have slide that explain those executives, something like what I'm talking about?
Yes, this presentation is more catered toward today's conversation. We use a different presentation that articulates, well, actually, this. You can buy Elements to just do your impact assessment and some basic documentation around metadata. But if you want to groom and better prepare your team for gathering true requirements and delivering those to the team that needs to go build it, there's a whole separate presentation, value matrix, capability matrix that goes along with it. But to your point, I think you nailed it. This is a cultural shift from what is being done today. It's a change management exercise, and the most difficult part is getting that high level alignment, getting those executives bought in to tell the teams, this is how we're going to run Salesforce moving forward. We're no longer going to be siloed from the business. It's going to be directly linked, and the business is going to articulate their problems in context to their operation, because we want to reduce the amount of waste. We're seen as a cost center, and now we've been able to identify just what costs are going into this build and what the value is coming out of it. Elements is actually doing a far more formal presentation of this data, probably in the next month or two, because this is a major issue in the ecosystem. Everyone's talking about agility while they're, let's say, causing problems for themselves or just getting in their own way most of the time. And from what we've seen, it's not really the IT team or engineering team's fault. It's the business kickstarting those enhancements without proper context.
I can definitely see how you speed up the time for process mapping. And especially converting from traditional or historical process maps to UPN. I can definitely see how that would dramatically, because I know lots of folks don't even make that jump because it's just an extra it's a lift that's just too heavy, takes too long, and they don't see the value of it. So you're speeding up that adoption of UPN, which has a whole bunch of benefits that you don't really see until down the road. So I could definitely see how you know this, and especially if you bake it in where you're basically uploading an existing process map and then converting it to a UPN. Oh my God, the amount of time saved there is dramatic. So yeah, kudos to you for that. Definitely see it. As a consultant, I could use this.
Yeah, and I'm coming from similar state like Doug was just explaining, but you on beginning you said you see the most these to be used in consultancy space, and I'm asking you, do you, and the biggest challenge in consultancy, as I can see, is I'm spending 2 years to finalize project, it's few $1 million, and I'm going go live, and then I'm breaking this line with my customer because they have different supporting method after go live. And if I don't use your methodology in collaboration with the same customer that they can inherit everything what I did there, I'm just making it head down. Now, my question for you is, do you met good consultancy company that has great experience with all of what you do and customer continuing with this down the road on their own, like inheriting all knowledge with no knowledge transfer gaps and things like that that's coming with breaking the engagement after go live?
That is for us, that's the highest effort aspect of what we do, working with, the trusted advisor to help educate and guide the client when they're trying to evaluate, is this dynamic asset something I want to own once the project is complete? And the big conversations, or at least the big data points around that are historically, if you take a step back, many of the experiences in hiring a consultancy to come in, do a project, and then leave, they're ultimately producing a product. Now, if they're producing a product, the information and knowledge that went into building it is incredibly important to then be able to manage it. And from what we've seen, it's spreadsheets, documents sitting on a shared drive that aren't entrenched in the day-to-day operation of that Salesforce org. So they might pay attention to it a little, the clients, right after, but they essentially just go back to okay, we're just going to manage it moving forward. We're going to make changes. We don't know how it was built or why it was built this way. They don't spend the time because it's not part of their mandate to own that information, not just at the end of the project, but throughout that entire project. Because what they're getting is a deliverable that is the summation of a great many decisions. And if that information isn't readily available in terms of why those decisions were made, you can't really manage the leftovers. You end up with like CPQ, I think, is one of the biggest examples of that. Just becomes unbelievably challenging. You spend all your time trying to figure out how it's constructed as opposed to making changes that the business needs. So,
sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
no, two things. Maintainability and transferability of knowledge is what makes the adoption of projects viable long term. Please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. So just for context, like my background, I see firsthand the downfalls of not having a process like this. I've worked in a few like sort of startups and very scrappy. Someone pings someone, they build it, no testing, no documentation, like nothing. It's nuts. So I know firsthand what happens when you don't have something formal like this. My question to you, Conrad, is like a bigger team, this makes sense. You have several admins, developers, you have BAs, you have product owners and people you can call the business, right? Does this product make sense in a smaller scale operation where it's like you have 2, maybe 3 Salesforce people, their roles aren't terribly clear, right? Trying to kind of see like how viable this would be in that scenario versus, like the fit for a large scale team makes sense to me, but and maybe it's more of a discussion about pricing and what value you get out of that and things like that. But would you recommend this product for like a 2-3 man operation, or is that kind of overkill?
Well, it's funny you mentioned the two or three member team because that's where we've seen the most immediate uptick in volume of customers because, governance is a real challenge. They need something that does a lot of different things and can centralize that information that they can then use to gain a foothold in managing the org and instead of just being order takers. There's there's a really good article from Found HQ. These guys do hiring, but they talk about this product management layer. And I like what they say here, that it's the difference between a Salesforce team being order takers and product strategists. So we even have one of our customers own backup. They describe what we were trying to articulate, these dependency mappings. They're saying, because we typically sell this as try to figure out what you're going to break before you break it. And they came to us and said, yeah, that's all well and good, but you know where this has been more valuable to us? This has been more valuable when the business stakeholder reaches out to us and says, I want to make a change to this. Then we can actually articulate to them how long that change would take because they're asking for it end of day Friday and we're thinking end of the year. And here's why. And so that what they're doing is moving from order taker to that product strategist, where they can help the business strategically prioritize their enhancement requests in their go-to-market strategy, which specifically is incredibly important for those smaller teams in those smaller high growth areas.
Actually, I'd like to speak to that too, if I could, Connor. Prior to my current consulting role, I was working in nonprofits as solo admin, so it was just me.
Right.
Not just me, but yeah.
Superhuman.
Yeah, and I had taken on Elements early on, and I left it at two of my previous organizations, and I believe they're still both running it. And it was just as a way for me to understand, because I'm trying to understand what the business needs for me. I could shout it out there, and it was that link to the metadata that I found really helpful.
Yeah.
But know what I'm gonna break before I break. Whether they're still using it, I don't know.
Cool. Interesting. Thanks for that.
Yeah, so just as a recap of what we looked at today, if you've got existing process maps, a lot of times teams tell us, they're 4 years old because that's the last time a consultancy came in and did this stuff and built it out for us, because it's not in our wheelhouse. We don't have tooling to support this. We haven't centralized. We haven't made a decision on how to do this. Or they've got teams that are doing it, but they aren't well documented. One of the biggest things we've noticed for converting maps to this UPN methodology is that data in equals data out, especially with AI. And if you're lacking information when you feed it, it's going to produce a haphazard response. I think we've all come across that playing around with the free GPT tools. So we've seen a lot of teams sort of double down on, look, let's take a look at what we've got. Let's go through it, understand, maybe in some cases redocument some areas, or at least use it and compare and contrast to what maps are being produced. And then from there, the generation of the process maps from texts produces a more accurate at first attempt process map that can then produce user stories that are far more accurate and save a lot more time down the road, or at least through the next steps in the change cycle.
Well, thank you for this demo. That was awesome. Was there more that you wanted to cover today, or have we hit it all, do you think?
I think we covered a fair amount. Yeah.